Pairing duck with sweet flavors such as orange sauce and cherries with duck confit and Peking duck with sweet hoisin has become so common that we often forget what a great savory dish it is. Recently I posted a video on Thai duck salad that shows this rich flavor, and now I give you my version of this old Austrian Christmas dish. To make it even more authentic, you can see the notations at the end of this video. As in the case of most of my recipes, this method was developed for restaurant service.
The seasoning mix is really quite strange, but the flavors come together and work in a way you wouldn't expect, especially with the hazelnuts. So we have half a teaspoon of dried sage, half a teaspoon of dried dill, half a teaspoon of cumin seeds. I know it looks like more, but cumin seeds just lay out flatter. A teaspoon of brown sugar, teaspoon of sesame seeds, teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of lovage, and half a teaspoon of green peppercorns. You can use white peppercorns if you can't get green. These are dried, not pickled in brine, by the way. And if you can't get the lovage, you can substitute equal parts of parsley and celery leaf. It's not really the same, but if that's what you can get, that's what you can get. You can grind these together with a mortar and pestle, or you can use the easy approach. I've got about 700 grams of duck. Obviously you can scale this up to however much you have, and as usual this looks like a lot of spice and seasoning compared to typical home recipes, because that's the difference. Restaurants use a lot of seasonings. So I'm going to work this around, massage it on both sides of the duck. You get the idea. And of course you get it on both sides. And take a sharp knife, the point of a sharp knife like this, and poke some little holes in the skin so that the fat has a way of leaking out. Okay. Now, you're going to leave this sit with these herbs on it for about 30 minutes before we begin the roasting process. And you can cut up the vegetables during this time. I have 120 grams of onion, roughly chopped. As you can see, roughly you want big pieces so they don't burn. Same as far as the chopping goes for the celery, but there's only 60 grams of celery and about 30 grams of green bell pepper.
Use a baking dish that's small enough that the vegetables will be stacked up on top of each other. Don't use a giant one so that the vegetables are all spread out thin or they'll burn. Also, you want to make sure that the duck pieces basically cover all of the vegetables. If a little bit of vegetable is peeking out like this, it's okay. But you don't want it to have like large areas where the vegetables are exposed to the heat, otherwise they'll just burn. Also, the ends of the duck legs hanging off of the baking dish like this, this is perfectly fine. Don't worry about this. They won't burn.
Now, the only other thing before it goes in the oven is I'm going to add about 1.5 ounces of white wine around here. You don't have to do this in a restaurant. We probably wouldn't unless it was a really good restaurant, because this just adds expense, and it's a fairly subtle effect in the end, but it's worthwhile. You've got some nice dry white wine. Go ahead and add it a little bit. Now we're going to put it in the oven. Now this is what it looks like after about 1 hour and 45 minutes. You can take a knife and feel that the meat is already basically tender. There's a lot of liquid in here that's from the duck that ran off. Now I'm going to put in the cloves of garlic, crank up the oven temperature, and finish it. So it had been at 160 degrees Celsius for the first 1 hour and 45 minutes. Then I cranked up the heat to about 220 with a fan assist on, for the last 15-20 minutes. It's just wringing out the last of the fat from this. It's really what it's like. Now we've got the cooked duck that's just going to be set off to the side here like this. Now we're going to pass this through a sieve. I've got juices collected here at the bottom. It's going to need to be, the fat needs to be skimmed off of this. I'm going to use a fat separating pitcher. Alternatively, you could refrigerate this overnight and then skim it off by hand, and the fat separating pitcher will be a lot more effective faster.
using the fat separating pitcher, you end up with a little bit of the duck fat on the top, and then we're going to use that for cooking the hazelnuts in just a moment. The rest of it is the broth, and we're going to use that for making the stuffing. You can see there's a few drops of fat floating on the broth, but that's not going to be an issue. It's just extra flavor. Don't worry about that.
Now in a skillet, I've got the 90 grams, about 3 ounces of hazelnuts. I'm going to begin toasting. Off to the side, I've got 90 grams of breadcrumbs. This is fresh bread, not stale bread, that I've cut into cubes, large cubes. I've got vegetables that were strained off, that were cooked with the duck, and of course I've got the duck, and of course the broth that was strained with the fat separating pitcher. And the dish that the duck and the vegetables were cooked in, I'm not going to wash this out because we're going to reuse this in just a moment for the stuffing. The next step is to toast the hazelnuts. I'm going to add some of the duck fat to this, about a tablespoon or so. We're frying the hazelnuts in the duck fat. After 3 or 4 minutes, you'll start to see some darkness, some fairly dark ones appearing. The next step will be that they're burnt, so you don't want that. And also, this oil is not going to just cool off instantly, so we're going to take these vegetables that were cooked, add that to the pan, turn off the heat, and this will cool the hazelnuts down so that they don't actually burn. Remove this from the heat, of course. After you've let this cool off for about 10 minutes so that it doesn't melt your food processor bowl, put all the vegetables into it with sage. You're going to need to add salt to this, and the exact amount. You really should taste it in order to determine it. Grind it a little bit and taste it. I know from past experience, for me it's about a teaspoon, but you'll certainly want to adjust this a little bit. And a little fresh cracked black pepper is always welcome. It's a secret of every hotel cook. Now, you want to break up these nuts some and process this, you'll see. This is pretty good. See, you've still got pieces of nuts in there, but there's no giant whole hazelnuts anymore. I'm going to give it just a tiny bit more. Okay, so it's good. Now, you have the bowl with the breadcrumbs. I'm going to add this to that. They're not really breadcrumbs. They're like fresh croutons. And now here's this liquid that was defatted. The duck was cooked with. Finally, now that I've got that out of the way, and I'll add the beaten egg to that. Now this will be ready to go in the oven in just a minute here. By now the oven should be settled back at the lower temperature again. And the same dish again, the duck and vegetables were cooked in. No point in using a new dish, it's the right size. And it's already got some fat left over in it, little bits that'll keep it from sticking, so we don't need to butter it or anything. And just in. Make sure it's even, because if it's not even, it'll cook unevenly. It needs to be flat on top. And now this goes into the oven. And here's what we have after 40 minutes at 180 degrees. You just kind of fluff this up a little bit. This will help dry it out. You want the steam to escape now. If you just leave it sitting here, it'll end up being soggy. You don't want that. So just fluff it up, leave it sit in the hot dish for, oh, I don't know, at least half an hour. At least half an hour.
Plated it with fried sage and pear slices cooked in butter. The second volume of my cookbook is now available through Amazon and other booksellers. It covers the YouTube recipes from the last 8 months with more in-depth information. I received requests for the procedures on all recipes, and I've listened to you. Every recipe has step-by-step directions, and of course there are recipes that aren't on YouTube. But this is not just a recipe book. Far from it, as you can see from some of the topics scrolling by here. I'm certain that anyone who watches my channel and any serious cook will find this book a treasury of useful and new information you won't find anywhere else. If you want to know more about my adventures as a chef around the world and have some great laughs along the way, be sure to check out the video tour of my book, 40 Years in One Night. It's up on YouTube right now. Click the link. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.